Welcome back from the break. You're still watching This Week, and I'm Samna Sambo. Now, coming up next is a growing concern about the threats facing Nigeria's democracy ahead of the 2027 general election. As Nigeria transitions into full election mode this year, pro-democracy watchers are troubled about heightened political temperature, which is heating up at a scale that puts the country's democracy under intense pressure. Analysts are also worried about the difficulties with which democratic institutions are struggling to respond to pressures emanating from the actions of political actors. But even more troubling is the fear that the entire political landscape has been marked by heightened elite bargaining, strategic political realignments, and premature campaigns. According to Samson Itodo, the executive director of Yaga Africa, these developments reflect a troubling pathology of Nigeria's electoral politics, which relegates governance for the advancement of electoral ambition. Itodo is also the principal partner of the Election Law Center and chairperson of the African Union Advisory Group, including being board of advisors of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Well, Samson Itodo, Executive Director of Yaga Africa, joins us now in the studio for more insight on this. Thank you so much, Samson.
Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you, and thank you for all you do for the people of Nigeria. I mean, let's start first of all with what's happening in Uganda. I don't know if you're saying this about Nigeria, what's happening in Uganda, what's been your view?
At least Uganda is one country that Nigeria can say we're better than Uganda in this management of elections, because what happened in Uganda cannot pass, for an election. A situation where, there are lots of manipulation. The entire political environment was not conducive, whether for voters or for opposition actors. Now we're seeing, this sort of endorsement of authoritarianism, and President Museveni will be extending, his 40-year rule of that country. So we cannot call what happened in Uganda an election. In fact, it is a travesty, of electoral democracy. So it is just unfortunate. And we stand with the good people of Uganda who are pushing back against these authoritarian tendencies.
And the reason why I'm asking you this is that in your piece, you actually said that if we continue on this trajectory that we are, where opposition political parties are being muzzled, there's no fair competition within the electoral space, where political parties that took part in 2023 may not take part in 2027, that can lead to this kind of situation whereby Nigerians just watch and say, okay, since you guys have conscripted the electoral space, we won't even go out to vote, and then before you know it, the election will be in trouble next year.
Absolutely. The article you reference is very clear that we are actually on a dangerous path as a country, and that's one of the threats, for a 2027 election, is that the possibility of a competitive election is very, very slim. It's very slim because there is a muzzling, there is a decimation of opposition political parties. And our political elite need to recognize that competition and contention are part of an electoral process, that you derive legitimacy, because elections have legitimacy when they are an offshoot of competition. So if you eliminate competition, you cannot say that the outcome at the end of the day enjoys some form of legitimacy. This sort of mass defection, most of them actually induced, is really unfortunate. It does not bode well for our democracy. So it does pose a huge threat. And what is really particularly concerning is the fact that when people defect, they make it look like it's a guarantee of electoral success in 2027.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're saying. Sorry, I have to chip in that when they move into the APC, it looks like it's guaranteed that they will win elections under APC, or they will have federal might to back them to win elections.
That's exactly what they're saying. It means the voters don't count. What they're simply saying is that the votes don't hold any weight. And when you do that, citizens start disengaging. And when citizens, there's no elections without the people. That's why it's called elections. So when you eliminate that, democracy loses its ingredients and its vitality. And that's something our political class must understand. And you know, this whole mass defection, and you say, oh yes, when you move to the ruling party is a guarantee. It's even an indictment, you know, on the ruling party itself. Because when you say you're guaranteed electoral success, what does it really mean? Does it mean that, one, you have access to state resources, you know, to buy votes? Does it mean that you have access to federal might to intimidate opposition or intimidate voters? What does it really mean? Or you have, you know, the backing of the state to compromise election officials? What does it really mean? So that is a huge threat, you know, for our democracy. And I think good men and good women of conscience should not keep silent at this particular time. And this is why the National Assembly need to rise to the occasion. The entire legal regime that permits this sort of unnecessary, you know, defections from one platform to the other without any consequence really needs to be regulated, whilst also balancing the fact that people do have a right, you know, to cross carpet. But then it has to be based on certain, you know, principles and certain conditions. Currently, the legal framework is very weak.
Yeah, and talking about the legal framework, we're actually expecting the National Assembly to conclude work on the Electoral Act amendment. And one of the key provisions which the lawmakers say they are working towards is electronic transmission of election results and all of that. How much more do we have to wait? Because, I mean, people are already saying that it may not fully be ready, or it may be ready within a short notice close to when primaries are supposed to come up. INEC is expected to release the guidelines for the elections and all of that, timetable and all of that. How much more can we wait? And how is the advocacy like? Is it being received very well that we must use electronic transmission?
I think it's very unfortunate, Sambo, that this is the 17th of January and we don't have the 2026 Electoral Act simply because the Senate has not voted and concluded its own part of the work. It's a bicameral legislature. The House of Reps have concluded. They've passed the electoral bill. They're waiting for the Senate. Well, they'll resume on the 27th. We hope that they prioritize this and conclude this process. Because like you said, as long as there is no legal certainty, it jeopardizes and it threatens the 2027 election. And it's simple. If you look at the current act, there are provisions that regulate the conduct of primaries. INEC, by virtue of the current law, is required to issue timetable for 2027 on the 20th of February. That is less than a month, about a month away. When will the National Assembly pass the law, transmit to the president, and then INEC needs to now think about the guidelines, because its guidelines for the regulation of political parties and their primaries is going to be revised to make it what? Consistent and compliant with the electoral law. So these are the kinds of things. But it's just sad that the Akpabio-led Senate did not prioritize this before they proceeded on holiday. It's unfortunate, but the National Assembly needs to know that it has missed the deadline that it set for itself without any compulsion from citizens. They said that by December of 2025, they would have concluded this. Now they've moved the goalpost. We hope that it concludes in January. If it doesn't, then somewhere in February. So we are going to be getting into a regime and a time when there's some level of uncertainty, which again is a major threat to the 2027 elections.
And could it be that there are some anti-democratic forces that don't want this new Electoral Act to come in place? Because, I mean, it will be very easy to come and, you know, explain to Nigerians that the time is too short and all of that. So let's continue with the old Electoral Act, 2022. What would be the danger if we go ahead with the 2022 Electoral Act?
I think it will be the worst, perhaps, disservice that this National Assembly will do to Nigerians and also our democracy if they don't conclude these electoral amendments. Because it does provide, you know, some provisions. And I'll give a classic example. It's the whole point about electronic transmission of results. For heaven's sake, for the often time, Nigerians have said that we need an electoral act that provides legality for electronic transmission of results. The Supreme Court also said that electronic collation is not part of our election results management system. The INEC chairman, the new INEC chairman, has also said that they're going to infuse more technology in managing results transmission. This regime, where you have different results from the same polling unit, where you have a different result on the IRF, a different result produced as certified true copies of the results, and then a different, from EC8A, a hard copy. That particular scenario needs to be a relic of the past. And one way to address this is to ensure you confer legality on electronic transmission of results, so that any result that makes it to the IREV has some level of legality. Those are some of the lofty provisions in the Electoral Act. And I want to give the National Assembly the benefit of doubt. They've got an opportunity when they resume, especially the Senate, to conclude this process, send it to the President, let him assent, and let us start full preparations for the 2027 elections.
Could we have the INEC, the new INEC chairman, to actually, put pressure on them? Is there any way through backroom channels he could actually, talk to them and let them know that, whatever they do or don't do would affect, his job, and then, of course, what the nation is expecting?
I'm quite aware that the INEC chairman has made some proposals. In fact, upon resumption, he sent proposals to the National Assembly, for consideration. We're waiting to see what the Senate will do. Some of his proposals are already contained in the bill. As you're aware, I'm also part of the technical committee on this. Yes, that pressure needs to be on the National Assembly, but it also needs to be on the President. And if this same National Assembly has shown to Nigerians that they can consider a bill in one day and pass it, like the national anthem bill, if they have demonstrated some level of urgency in considering some legislation, this one that is critical and central to our electoral democracy, we need to see a sense of urgency on the part of the nation, particularly the Senate, because the House has really demonstrated leadership, in the management of this reform process. So if they can pass the national anthem bill in
not only that,
a
even
few
ministerial
hours,
screenings, so many other
then
ones.
I see no reason why they cannot conclude on this amendment the same week that they resume, and that is what, on the 27th, because all they need to do is to pass the amendments. It's there. It just needs to be read for third reading.
Well, but if they disagree with the House in other areas, that would mean, taking a long period.
I don't see why they should disagree with the House, because both committees, both in the Senate and the House, were working together. The leadership of the Senate and the House constituted a small committee to harmonize their positions. Those positions have been harmonized. They are reflected in the draft bill. I'll be shocked to see that when the Senate goes into its vote, it will disagree on some of those provisions that relates to whether it's strengthening party primaries or conferring some level of independence on INEC, because the bill also says that it strengthens INEC's financial independence. It says INEC shall receive all its funding for a general election 1 year before the election. So most of those provisions are quite progressive, and I see no reason why they shouldn't conclude this process by the end of January.
Yeah, and we're calling on the Akpabio-led Senate to actually do that, because, there's been so much pressure on the Senate President to actually act and hasten some of this. Because, look at the Constitution Review. It's been there. Nigerians are waiting because, whatever the Constitution Review comes up with will also affect the conduct of elections in one way or the other. And so people are wondering what this 10th National Assembly is doing on all of that. But as we try to wrap up this conversation, let's talk about some of the solutions you have brought in place. You've said that the political behavior of the elite is affecting how the perception ahead of 2027 general election, and the citizens too, and all of that. But you've talked about how an activist and principled INEC could help, strengthen the process, and how citizens can help, defend the integrity of the nation electorally ahead of the elections by putting pressure not only on their lawmakers, but institutions to work. Because you also mentioned that we have weak institutions too.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned in the article, there are three, interconnected pathways. The first, you need an activist and a principled INEC. The INEC chairman has outlined 5 key areas and priority. I think what the commission needs, it needs to assert its independence. And I've said that how the INEC manages party registration, the candidate nomination process, is really critical. because INEC's independence will be tested along these domains. The second is relating to candidate nomination. The primaries will soon start. This is one area where politicians put a lot of pressure, on INEC. And so INEC needs to assert its independence in the nomination of candidates. It needs to monitor those primaries, should not accept lists of candidates that are submitted to the commission when a validly conducted primary has not held, because that's what the law also said. The third domain is around results management. And we can come to that. But there's another fourth one. Now, INEC has budgeted 1 trillion for this year and perhaps filled into the elections. INEC's procurement is one aspect where politicians put a lot of pressure on INEC because they want some favors or businesses, from the commission. This is one aspect where the commission needs to assert, its independence, whilst also ensuring some transparency and accountability. The second point that I have argued is that if the 2027 elections will be credible, it will be credible because, one, citizens show up. And I say that one threat, to the 2027 election is this cynicism, on the part of citizens. And you cannot blame citizens who don't believe, in the process. But not believing is not the solution, to this particular problem that we have. We've got to put the fire under the feet of our politicians, especially those ones who are seeking to run for office. We need to compel political parties to present candidates that have competence, that have character, and they have the capacity, to lead. But then, the game for 2027 is not one where citizens will just go to the polling unit and just vote and leave the polling unit. No. In 2027, you should vote, but be prepared to protect your mandate. And by protecting your mandate, we simply mean stay at the polling unit, provide the vigilance, go to the wards, go to the local government, because if we have 50, 60% turnout in elections, we make it difficult for people to rig. They can only rig if there's just a small fraction of people, that come up, show up at election. So Nigerians need to come out to vote and protect their mandate, because the salvation for 2027 is mandate protection. But mandate protection in a civil and a legal manner, but not instrumentalizing violence.
Well, let me quote from what you wrote. That your article said, unpopular and insecure political actors are deeply threatened by high voter turnout because it limits opportunities for election manipulation.
That is right.
Brilliant. But let's talk about, as we, coast home, let's talk about one thing that one of the presidential aspirants, Peter Obi, had mentioned sometime last year. He said that this is the time for Nigerians to start working on INEC, putting pressure on INEC to do what it needs to do. And then once it publishes the data of all the presidential candidates and all of that, check those data and be sure that those who don't have qualified certificates or who have problems with the certificates and all of that are fished out right on time, so that we don't have a situation whereby you get to the courts and the courts will call it a pre-election matter. And he raised a very critical point by doing that, because several times when candidates' credentials come up and all of that, court will rule and say these were pre-election matters and all of that. I don't know, as someone who's within this sector, do you think people should rethink that statement?
No, I think what the Nigerians need to understand is, by virtue of pronouncements from the Supreme Court, it is clear that issues relating, to qualification are pre-election matters. That's one. Two, that when it comes to scrutinizing documents of, political or candidates, the responsibility lies in the political party first. The parties need to ensure due diligence before they submit their documents of candidates to INEC. Yes, citizens need to be vigilant. But even if you expose it, one of the things that the 2022 Electoral Act did is that it removed the right that citizens have to go to court to challenge, a candidate or a political party where they have tendered false qualification documents. That's one thing that happened in the 2022 Electoral Act. So what lawyers call locus, the right to sue, is now vested only in an aspirant of that same political party.
Oh, not
even an opposing party.
Okay.
You have to be an aspirant in a political party that has fielded a candidate that submitted fake academic qualifications. Okay. And so this restriction and limitation of locals is one thing that we've debated, because what it did is it removed accountability and the powers that citizens have and vested them, into political parties.
Right.
And if we know our parties, very, very good and specialist in backdoor elite bargaining and settlement. And I think that what citizens can do is to expose this and put it to the parties or even the aspirants to challenge, fake documents and credentials tendered, by aspirants or candidates in the next general elections.
Well, I mean, you've raised a point there. We know how, backroom and, negotiations usually happen. So if one of the aspirants raises this, I mean, he could be reached out through the back door. But very quickly, just before I let you go in 30 seconds, I mean, you ended that with the talk about a patriotic and non-aligned security architecture to protect the elections. I mean, how patriotic do we expect our, security services to be as the nation goes into election mode by next year?
I think our security agencies just need to understand that their fidelity is to the Constitution. It's not to an individual, that they owe it to the Nigerian people to protect Nigerians, irrespective of political affiliation or geographical extraction. This whole, respect and protection for regimes without considering that this is a democracy needs to stop. Our security agencies have shown that they can be non-aligned, that they can be open and non-partisan in previous elections. So they can do it. So it won't be the first time. But moving to 2027, if, the ruling party is accepting mass defectors, the security agencies should also know that for those who choose not to defect and other opposition parties, they also have a right to security protection. Yeah. And that is the whole concept of fairness. And so please, our security agencies need to demonstrate patriotism and demonstrate that they are not, aligned to a particular political party, but they exist to protect the vast majority of Nigerians. All
right, sir. We must thank you so much for that opinion, especially now that police escorts have been withdrawn from private citizens and all of that. We just hope it will not be used against opposition politicians during the election, where those who are not aligned to the APC-led federal government are not given protection and all of that. Well, we must thank you so much, Samson Itodo,
Thanks,
who is an
election,
democracy and public policy enthusiast. He's also the executive director of YAGA Africa, principal partner of the Election Law Center, chairperson of the African Union Advisory Group on AI in Peace, Security and Governance. Thank you so much once again. Well, that's the much we can take on this edition of This Week. Thanks to our production team here in Abuja, Lagos and London. Do join us same time next week for another exciting edition. I'm Samuel Sambo.